The basis for the move. But Jody Ihaka reports there are more questions than answers.
This is the man proclaimed as the new Maori King. His background, his role in the so-called Maori Parliament have all been kept secret.
I'm not here to divulge his personal life.
Te Runanga o Ko Huiarau claims to represent all Māori, but no recognised leaders were at the launch.
It is not important to us. It's all about self-determination and not about having to go and ask Māori leaders that are there at the moment.
Today they called him Taiopuru Waikato Tauranga Wharihiri the 7th. In 1989 he was calling himself Te Ririya the 5th.
But now a new player has entered centre stage, a supreme leader.
That makes me a Taiopuru or a king.
Māori leaders at the time weren't impressed.
He was a fraud.
The group claims to have overseas funding and wants to improve Māori health, education, housing and welfare, but won't say how. And this morning the group issued a news release announcing a dawn ceremony at its office in central Auckland. But security guards wouldn't let anybody into the building. Māori leaders I spoke with today described the group as secretive and certainly not representative of all Māori. And Māori Affairs Minister Tau Henare says he's never even heard of them. Jody Ihaka, One Network News.
Surrounds what's touted to be an independent Maori Parliament. The group's leader has claims to a royal Maori bloodline. But at today's launch, questions about his background were regally rebuffed.
An unusual spectacle, guards welcoming guests who'd come in anticipation of seeing a new Maori leader revealed. The group claim they're resurrecting a Maori Parliament, Te Runanga o Ko Huiarau, not in existence for nearly a century. The group claims to have ancient Maori treasures, including a treaty written on pre-European dogskin, a Maori war club belonging to the brother of explorer Kupe, and a carved baton once gifted to King William IV of England. The group offered to sell Free National News video footage of the items. The offer was turned down. Left our camera enough for a glimpse of the new regal-looking leader, identified as the 7th hereditary leader of the Maori Parliament. But further details about him weren't being made public.
I mean, those sorts of questions I think you should direct at perhaps Ariki and Taiopuru. I'm not here to divulge his personal life.
The group's credibility is being questioned.
It's rather like a mythology, a cult, a mystique that Māori are wanting to grab hold of, and as a way of legitimising this tino rangatiratanga Māori sovereignty movement.
The group plans to open its Māori Parliament in this central Auckland building early next month. This is Gideon Porter for Nightline.
Over the past 3.5 years, we've been around the Motu sharing the kaupapa of Ko Huiarau history, the history of tools, the ancient tools that our tupuna did for us. And some of these here are the taonga of the evidence of what our tupuna used to do, and as we all are aware, they were very, very clever. And it was through the taonga, or the evidence that had been researched for quite some time, that we were able to take through on the 28th of October what we accomplished, all of us together. Without going back into too much of the full presentation, I'd just like to bring our attention to this map up here. As most of us are aware that each of those countries that are indicated by a flag, the flag of the Māori sovereign nation, each of those countries still hold a contractual treaty here in Aotearoa with our Ariki. And that all came about by the trade and the industry that used to happen, and it began in the late 1700s into the early 1800s, and those contractual treaties still remain today. The flag that was gifted by King William IV in 1832 is still the flag of a Māori sovereign nation. It's gazetted, and all these things had to be proved, and the fact that at international level we're recognised as a Māori sovereign nation because the crown of another nation, the Crown of England, recognised and gifted that flag. What the flag also means is not only a sovereign flag, but it is the protection under King Henry VIII Charter, which allows us free access to every port throughout the world, every British port throughout the world in trade and industry. And that is how our tupuna used to trade, is because under the protection of this flag, they had free access. And the reason, and what our tupuna used to carry before that were the colours of the giant prehistoric eagle, Ko Huiarau, the colours of red, dark navy blue, gold, white. And those were the colours that they dyed the muka and carried that on the ships. And it was because of the confiscation of one of our ships in the West Indies that this flag here came about, is when our Aurere travelled up to England and met with King William IV. So from that time there on, there has always been this relationship and contact between the sovereign nations of these other countries throughout the world. We went back through the Mandate Treaty, and the Mandate Treaty is the only Tiriti or Waitangi that carries the two sovereigns of two sovereign nations. The Crown of England, this is the personal seal of Queen Victoria, and the personal seal of Waikato, who was the Taiopuru at the time of the treaty being signed. This is a copy, a photograph, and on the 28th of October we have the original Tiriti Waitangi written on pre-European dog skins in vegetable dye. And that actually was brought out, the vegetable dye being very sensitive to the light, and so it was only allowed out the next day that the Aurere allowed that for the hapu. The photographs behind, the upper and the lower Maori Parliament. The upper is made of all the Aurere through whakapapa, and the lower house of the Parliament is made up of rangatira and again through whakapapa. So all the way through, we've always had our own Maori Parliament. The next photograph down is the photograph of the palace household guards, and they were always there to protect the sovereign of the Māori nation. And if you look closely, you'll find that they're made up of different nationalities, because every other sovereign nation protected our sovereign nation, and vice versa. Right down the bottom there's a ship on your left, and that's the first defence ship that was purchased here in Aotearoa, and it was purchased by Ko Huiarau during the 1920s. And on your right is a photograph of the Native Navy who are in training there, and that takes us back to about the 1880s. So all these evidence of what our tupuna used to do is still there in the archives. It's just that history in Aotearoa has been written by Pākehā, for Pākehā, and from a Pākehā perspective. So this big chunk of history that is so important to Māori has not been taught to us when we've been at school. On the far side, you've got Māori-owned ships. In the back of the British registered ships, there are something like 400 odd ships owned by Māori and owned by rangatira and Aurere. And the reason for that is from the moment we received this flag, this sovereign flag, all our ships throughout the world had to be registered in the back of the British registered ships in order for every other nation to allow us free access to their countries. Down the bottom is the Union Steamship Company, because it was during the late 1840s the Union Steamship Company first came to the shores of Aotearoa, and on coming to this country, I don't know whether you can see behind here, but there's a flag that was gifted to them in the colours of red, gold, navy blue and white. And those colours were taken from our giant prehistoric eagle, which has always been the manu of the Taiopuru, and that allowed the Union Steamship Company the same rights as we had, our tupuna had. They were allowed to visit the shores of Aotearoa and the shores of Te Moananui-a-Kiwa. So it was a contractual agreement. The Union Steamship Company became Shore Savill, and today we know that as the P&O lines. And we see that on every rail container and on the trucks on the road and the ships at sea. They still carry the flag of the colours of Pōkioi, and in their head office they still carry the flag of the Māori sovereign flag, because that's their authority that they had to come to the shores of Aotearoa and the shores of Te Moananui-a-Kiwa. Now, within Te Moananui-a-Kiwa, those boundaries were taken from ancient Māori dimensions of the heavens, and they correspond with ancient Tahitian, ancient Hawaiian dimensions of the heavens, and it's known as Whakaahua Te Ao Marama, or the sacred mirror triangle. Within this area, each of these dots is a country underneath, and this middle triangle is always represented the genetic bank, where all life form begins. And that has always been within the boundaries of those three triangles, the boundaries of Te Moananui-a-Kiwa. Each of those countries have exchanged contractual treaties, and they exchanged those without tupuna, and those contractual treaties still remain. The reason for that was to protect all the countries, or Te Moananui-a-Kiwa, from being exploited by foreign visitors, and by holding onto their own mana, their own resources, and their own lands. So that is what Te Moananui-a-Kiwa means within Ko Huiarau, and that each of these countries have an ariki, and each of those ariki recognise Ko Huiarau, because a long time ago they exchanged these contractual treaties. So the contractual treaties that are within the rest of the world, as well as within Te Moananui-a-Kiwa, are still existing, and all this time, right up until today, they have been in the kaitiaki of the ariki, the rangatira, and they have never ever been a national museum. About 2 years ago, there has been a coming together from all over the Motu, from all over Te Moananui-a-Kiwa, coming together these ariki and coming together of the taonga. And for whatever reason, no one went out to do this. It was just a joint feeling that these things, these taonga must all come back together. And it's been a perfect timing, because by the 28th of October, just passed, which was the Declaration of Independence, we were able to reopen the doors of Kohuiarau. In 1808, there was a coming together of hapu throughout, and the reason for that was because there was this whole infiltration of traders, whalers, sealers coming down into Aotearoa, coming down into the Pacific, and because of this there was this fear, this threat of our resources, our lands being taken over by foreign visitors. So the ariki got together, and they got together at a place called Aurere. And the reason for that is something happened back there during the 1500s, a very historical event, and it went back to the coming together of Mahinarangi of Kahungungu and Tūroko of Tainui. And it was the coming together of these two waka through the whakapapa, and mainly back through to Takitemu being always been known as the more senior of the waka lines. Mahinarangi travelled through to meet with Tūroko, who was living down at Rangiatia near Otapaha, and on the way she stopped at Okurere and she gave birth to Raukawa. And because of the place where she gave birth, that became wāhi tapu, and it became a neutral place for all different iwi to come together. So from the 1500s onwards, there was this gathering of united tribes. So therefore in 1808, they set up e Rokurore Turunanga Ko Huiarau, the gathering of the hundreds. And this is what they had set up. It's the Maori Parliament, as in Kohuiarau, and the two whare. The upper whare represents Te Whare Waitangi hapu, and the bottom whare represents Te Whare e Ruru i o Pohanga, meaning it is the operational arm of the hapu. When this was set up, it was set up as Māori sovereign owned, and it still is. That each of these whare in here are untouchable, unpenetratable by government or any other sovereign throughout the world. It totally belongs to Māori sovereignty. That Te Moana Nui a Kiwa represents all the countries within those three triangles. That it is represented by the ariki of all the countries within that boundary. That Te Whare Te Karere represents the archives of the Māori nation, that when Te Tiriti o Waitangi was signed, there became three archives. And the three archives represent Queen Victoria, the House of St. James in England, Waikato Tairia, Te Whare Te Karere, Governor Hobson, the archives in Parliament here in Aotearoa. So every time there's documentation that goes to Parliament, there's documentation that goes to the House of St. James in England, and documentation that's always gone to Te Whare Te Karere. Te Whare Taonga represents the whare that houses all the contracts and treaties or the taonga. And up until 1920 in Wellington, there used to be a whare that was there, and it used to house all these taonga. But because of the many things that had taken place, there was no pūtea left to maintain. So the ariki had no choice but to pull down the whare, burn the whare, and bury the remains. But the taonga went out to Ngā Hau went out to all the ariki lines for them to be the kaitiaki, and they today still hold these taonga. Te Whare Whakaapua is the House of Authorities, and it's through that house that we were able to reopen Ko Huiarau. That this taonga here, the mandate Tiriti o Waitangi, would be categorised as an authority on behalf of the Maori nation. That the toke that you would have seen at the opening, it was the ads that has always been used right back to Kupe, and that has always been held within the Taiopuru lines. That the toko Te Awarangi Nui o Mokoia has always been gifted and there as the free carriage of Westminster on behalf of the Māori nation. That we have the right to go directly to the Privy Council, and we've used that and we've done that. So these taonga, and there are many others, are those that represent the authorities on behalf of the Māori nation. Te Whare Tairia represents the whakapapa line of the Taiopuru, and it has always done all the way back, and it is protected by whakapapa. Te Whare Native Internal Affairs looked after health, education, whakakainga, and welfare. Te Whare Aurere Bank is the first bank that was set up here in Aotearoa, and it's the Native Reserve Bank. It is still there, and we were able to bring that out once we opened the doors on the 28th. The Royal Palace Household Guards is represented there, as I showed you on the photographs, and they were there always to protect the sovereign line of the Māori nation. The ariki aristocrats, ahupiri o ngā kōhere, is still written like that, because in the House of St. James in England, that's exactly how they are acknowledged and written at international level. TASS, T-A-S-S, represent Taiopuru Awaroa's Secret Service, and they have always been there as any monarchy or any sovereign line. There is always an intelligence service that has been there to protect Kohuiarau. Now the bottom whare is made up of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 whare. The native internal affairs looks after health, education, papakainga and welfare. The commercial arm looks after the trade and industry throughout Aotearoa, Te Moananui-a-Kiwa and the rest of the world. The Onehunga Endowment Trust was the name of the lower bank that the Native Reserve Bank had dropped a warrant down. That was the name of the bank that used to operate on behalf of Māori. In 1947, when Ko Huiarau went into recess, the government became the trustee on behalf of the Onehunga Endowment Trust. So the new banking arm or finance arm that has opened is called Taiopuru Finance. And it is named after the Taiopuru Waikato Tairia, who originally set up the Native Reserve Bank and originally set up the Onehunga Endowment Trust. So it's in remembrance of Waikato Tairia Finance. The Native Justice Department represents Native Justice. There has always been, before European justice in this country, Māori customary law, and that is recognised. And recently, Doug Graham publicly announced that there are two laws in this country. There is European law and there is Māori law, Māori customary law. Native defence has always been represented, and as I've shown you, the first warship that was purchased here was purchased by Kohuiarau. And native defence has always been there as Aurere Ihoia. The Confederation of Chiefs, or Rangatira, is actually made up as the lower house of the Maori Parliament. So we have the upper house, which is the Aurere, and the lower house, which is the Rangatira. Hapu iwi, although at the very bottom of this whole structure, is where the real empowerment has come from. Because without hapu, we would never have been able to reopen the doors of Kohuiarau. And so it was in June this year, a submission went in from the 7 main tribal areas because there had to be representation of hapu in those 7 main tribal areas. They put forward their submission, and altogether the submission went through to the Aurere to reopen the doors of Kohuiarau. From there it was taken to the Taiopuru, and I'm not sure whether many of you have been able to read the pānui that went in the public notices. Okay, it explains quite clearly what the 21 days and 21 days all the way through meant. And so there was 21 days of appeal, 21 days of reappeal, all the way down. And right to the last 42 days where it was a notification sent to the Taipuru's Council, then asked the hearing of a single flight, that is Queen Elizabeth II, the Supreme Aurere of Kohuiarau, for her agreement to open the houses. It was her opportunity to reappeal against that. She did not. So hence it was that on the 28th of October, it was possible that we were able, as a group, to open the doors of Kohuiarau. The houses, there are 5 of the houses close to opening and await only the naming of their directors. And these are the House of Internal Affairs, the House of Laws, the House of Taiopuru Finance, the House of the Commercial Arm, and the House of Defence. Last Monday, the warrants were dropped down to the Commercial Arm, the Taiopuru Finance, the banking arm, and to the Defence. And the warrants have not yet been dropped down to Internal Affairs or Justice at this stage. But the process is now beginning. What that means is that each of these whare now are able to start structuring their internal structures and setting up. Now until each of those whare are able to do that and do it well, can they then duplicate and go out into the 7 main tribal areas? So that's really where the internals of Ko Huiarau are at. Just getting back to the 28th of October, I know that it has been quite a shock to the general public of Aotearoa. Briefly, where they say, where has Ko Huiarau come from? But of course, many have been able to be presented with evidence of the history, and once researching that and going back into it, they realise Ko Huiarau is ancient. It's not new, it is ancient. And so really it's just a whole education, re-education to the public of what our Maori Parliament is all about. There was a lot of negative publicity at the beginning, but as things continued, and of course after this public notice was put in the paper, the realisation is that it has been at Crown level. And so there's been some backing off of certain ridicule, realising it's a lot deeper than just something that's appeared overnight. So really, where we're at is right at the beginning of the structuring of Ko Huiarau. We have to open those doors first, and the detail is about launching Ko Huiarau. And that has allowed these different whare here to start structuring. I know that there's a lot of inquiry to when's going to happen, how long or how soon before hapu can be involved to the extent of being able to operate. And I guess those are the reasons why we've met today, is that we need to talk, we need to kōrero and share. You need to know where we're up to. We need to be able to share with you the queries that you have, and then hopefully today we'll be able to have your understanding, and just know that it's been 50 odd years. In fact, it's been 50 years, 1 month, and I think 11 days since Ko Huiarau went into recess. So there's a lot of that we have to do. There's a lot of addressing to be done, especially in the Justice Department. And in order to set ourselves up to be able to we need to first set up the initial basis for the internals of the head office in Ko Huiarau. Then we duplicate that and go out to the 7 main tribal areas. However, that's where we're up to right today, and I know there's a lot of questions that would like to be raised here today, so I hand it back to you to ask those. Kia ora.
Representatives are here with Derek in studio now.
Kia ora and welcome again to Aurere. Well, the chances are that unless you were inside, you will have become pretty confused earlier this week with the news coverage of a group called Te Runanga Ko Huiarau. Is it a Maori Parliament? Does it have a king? And how does it fit in with existing Maori institutions? In the studio today we have 3 people from Ko Huiarau. First of all, we have Huiatahi Niania from Ngāti Kahungungu, and Toko Waikato and Mahinarangi Forbes, both of whom are from Tainui. Tēnā koutou. Kia ora. Well, we'll be hearing from our guests shortly after this background report from Arana Taumata.
They call him the Taiopuru. His name, Tairea Waikato Tauranga Whakaherehere.
Waitawaha! The tāngata.
He's the 7th Taiopuru since 1808.
Not the Maori King as some have described him, but the Taiopuru.
Nā wai tēnā kore. Nā te pāke, nā tauhi. Ne, tiro hia te kupuraka a Taiopuru. E kiene, kare o he kupu kiro te reo Pākehā, e tai ana ki te kia, ki te Pākehā ko tēnei, te tikanga o tēnei kupu, a te Taiopuru. he Taiopuru anō te Taiopuru, he kingi anō te kingi. E ki ka mea koutou, ko tēnei te kingi, ko tēnei te Taiopuru, ka hono e koutou te kingi tanga me te Taiopuru, kao, ko tēnei te Taiopuru, ko tēnei ke te kingi tanga.
He is the ariki, the head of Te Rūnanga Ko Huiarau, an institution established to unite the tribes of Aotearoa. That, according to their records, happened in 1816. A united tribes army was also established under a common defence policy. Tereho of Ngai Tūhoi was the first commander. After Tereho, the commander was the renowned chieftainess of Ngāti Toa and Ngāti Raukawa, Topiora. Other commanders followed, but the army was disbanded in the 1870s. However, it's understood 21 bodyguards are retained as protectors of the Taiopuru. Te Rūnanga Ko Huiarau, the Assembly of the United Tribes, met from 1816. Rangatira of this time identified the threat of European colonisation to Maori tribal authority and set up this assembly, this parliament of sorts, as a countermeasure. It continued to meet until 1947. Now it's been revived because its supporters say there's a need for it.
The hui is about hapu who have pulled together, come together in unity. The focus is on the concerns for health, education, housing, welfare.
Koe nā te tikanga o Ko Huiarau anō, ne? Kia tūrei te whare paramato te tiwi mai. Hei whakatika i ngā mahi, hei whakatika i ngā ture, e pāna a e pai ana rānei kia tātou tiwi mai.
A number of taonga were displayed to validate their claims as a sovereign authority. A copy of the Treaty of Waitangi, made from pre-European dogskin, was put on show. It apparently has the two sovereign seals of Queen Victoria and the Taiopuru of the time, Waikato Tairea.
I will sign your treaty.
It's claimed that after 75% of rangatira signed the treaty, Waikato Tairea formally endorsed the pact by applying his seal to the document.
Me tangi mai, me tangi mai.
The Taiopuru holds Te Awarangi Nui o Mokoia, the talking stick. According to Ko Huiarau records, it was gifted to King William in 1832 for his recognition of the Māori nation as a sovereign state. In 1844, Queen Victoria gifted the taonga back to the Taiopuru. An ancient toki, a stone adze called Ko te Iripiri Kotama, is similar to the royal mace in other sovereign states and has installed each Taiopuru. It's claimed the toki was made for Reti, the brother of Kupe, some 500 years ago. Te Rūnanga Ko Huiarau say in their capacity as a sovereign authority, they have trade treaties with 60-odd countries worldwide and the ability to raise finance offshore to foster hapu development. Clearly, they believe that the present Māori institutions and initiatives are not working.
Every other avenue has been attempted and tried. It hasn't succeeded, and it's really about just going back to what our tūpuna have set up, and the tools are still there. I mean, personally, I can't answer for the hapu that is there, but it seems like a very general feeling and a shared feeling that this is what they wish to do.
Toko Waikato was more direct about what's happening in his rohe of Tainui.
Nā te mahi awangawanga, nā te mahi nanakia o Tainui Trust Board, ki tā mātu nei hapu a Ngāti Whawhākia I pēnei ai mātau.
Ko Huiarau, the gathering of many. Could this be the indicator of how many disaffected Māori there are? Of how many Māori there are who want change? Close to 1,000 people attended the ceremony to relaunch Ko Huiarau. Although most appeared to endorse the aims and philosophies of Ko Huiarau, others attended simply to find out more. But many questions are still unanswered. Questions about its social policies, where funding will be sourced from, and how the Assembly organises itself. They are questions that should be answered in coming months, as Ko Huiarau attempts to turn its plans into action.
I was fascinated when I was reading myself up on Ko Huiarau, looking at the documents, looking even at some of the transcripts provided from discussions in the colonial parliament last century. Yet why is it, do you think, I mean, it's all written down there. There are things written down there, as you've pointed out. Why do you think it is that there has been so little heard about the organisation publicly for such a long time? Why do you think that?
I think for me it is personally because of the history that was taught to me at school. And I'm only just come upon the waka through, I believe, my tipuna's directions and others, of course, in actually learning and hearing the Ngā Kōrero Ko Huiarau, something I never ever, and many of the people that I talked to, even to my own hapu, Ngāti Hinahika, never heard of it before.
What brought you on it, and what convinces you that this is a path that we should embrace?
I think what really convinces me, because of the whakapapa, that my great-grandfather, Haurere Niania, was one of the greatest supporter of Ko Huiarau and the signing of the treaty at Mahia. And I believe it's through that, through whakapapa, is why I'm very, very, very keen to see that ngā mahi I tuku iho e ngā tipuna would carry on.
Why do you think, there was a question asked in there, why has it come to the fore right now?
I believe because this is the right time. I believe when we look at what's happened over this past year, especially, o tātou mate, o tātou rangatiratanga, ko hoki atu roto nā manaki sako tērā taha, and I really believe in my own heart that the time is right.
One of the great confusions this last week, Tokoro, has been the question of the Taiopuru, and much of the early writing about it was calling it a king, and you discussed that in the report we saw earlier. How would you describe it? You said earlier there wasn't any English equivalent for Taiopuru, but how would you describe it if you had to in a collection of words? Would he be the first among equals and sort of thing in terms of ariki?
Kia ora, Derek. Kao, argo he kupu. Argo he taku tū tēraka. Kāre kau ana he kupu I roto te reo pāke mo te Taiopuru. Kāre hau e pirangi ana ki te kia hopungi e tau iwi tau e kupu raka ka wāwāhia, ka whakamahia kinotia, ne? Nō reira meheme ka tau, ka mau tātou ki tēnā kupu, Taiopuru, Waitangi. Engari kia noho pēnā, tūturu tapu, mai ano te tīmatanga ko ngā Taiopuru tuatai.
Okay, one of the relationships that clearly people are going to want to ask and want to know about is, what is the relationship between Taiopuru, and clearly there's evidence in the records that this organisation, Ko Huiarau, is one that had been active last century, compared to what we have now, the Kingitanga, which there seems to be one that has maintained a publicity thread through the century to still be understood now in the same way it was understood last century. What's the relationship between the two organisations?
Me ata te tiro anō ki ngā ti hangai te Kingitanga, ne? He hangai te Kingitanga, hei whakatū te heke o ngā toto o te tangata, kia whakamutuingia te hoko whenua, I whakatū ai mō ngā pauaru, mō ngā rawa kore, mō rātou e kore whiwhi ana I ngā mahi naine. Koe nā te mahitanga, te whakatūtanga o Kingitanga. Ko te Ko Huiarau, e ki te anahau, I tū ai hei whakakotahi te iwi, a ngā hapu ke, hei whakakotahi ngā hapu, a hei rōpū, a kao, he ope mō ngā mea o ngā tangata kāre tai ki te whakaputa ngā wanga ki te kāwa no tēnei rangi. Engari, kia rātou ki roto I te kao heka te Kingitanga, he sovereignty, ne? Kiene he sovereignty Māori.
Tino rangatiratanga.
So, tino rangatiratanga pe, eka te pe te raka.
Engari, ki tō whakaaro kāre he whawhai wāinganui a Ko Huiarau me te Kingitanga.
A kia hau nei, he kingi tanga anō te kingi tanga me ona nei mahi he ko Huiarau, anō te ko Huiarau me ona nei tikanga.
E hara tēnei te whakawehewehe ia tātou?
E hake te whakawehewehe. Kia hau nei, e hake te whakawehewehe. Engai ki te whakakaha ia tātou te iwi Māori.
Okay, Mahinarangi, many questions last week or earlier this week with the, if you like, the coming out of Ko Huiarau. And people are still slightly confused. I mean, where I live, they're saying, hey, what's this organisation all about? Now, I know that representatives have been around the country talking to hapu, but where does Ko Huiarau go from here? Where is its support? This great, like a number of Māori movements, there's always talk of a large pūtea somewhere, and all of that comes into vogue as well. Where do things go from here?
Kia ora, Derek. Ko Huiarau is really made up from many hapu. Over the last 3.5 years, we've been travelling around the motu, sharing with marae-based hapu. The hui on Tuesday were representatives from those hapu that we have visited. How it fits in today is because hapu, it's a time where they feel the institutions that have been in place for them are not working for them. It has been a time to research back into the infrastructures that were in place, that our tupuna had put in place, and that's really before Trust Board Act was put in place in 1955. Because of that, hapu are wishing to be self-determined, look after their own resources, develop, set up an economic arm, and that's really how the move of going back to Ko Huiarau, or the ancient tools that were in place and still are there, mooted by hapu today.
This isn't a crafty trick to get away from iwi and to say, all right, in fact, I saw you on Te Karere talking about Ngāti Whawhākia being pretty upset about some of land that they could say was originally theirs has now been under the mantle of Tainui Whānui. Now, is this an attempt to revive hapu as opposed to iwi and iwi structures?
E me kia tu Derek, I te wā I haere mātu ki te tono I o nei mātu nei whenua, I haere ki ngā whare ture o tau iwi, ka mate I kona. Ka haere anō ki te whare nui o tau iwi, whare ture, ka hinga I kona. Ka nohoa Whawhākia, ko mate mātou, and ka uru mai te hi tangata, ki te kōrero ki a mātou katoa te a Whawhākia. Mai e tau tūtakitanga, boom. Ka tūtaki tātou ka tahi mātou ka mōhio kia Ko Huiarau.
How do we move forward? Where do you see Ko Huiarau moving forward from here? What happens next?
I feel that it will move towards the reinstatement of the whareparamata and me ona tikanga, and especially talking about hapu, papakainga, housing, education and social welfare. Plus all its other whares, as you know. But I think we have to start somewhere, and the beginning, what I guess from here, would be getting all our hapus or iwi together. I think this is...
Just to put people in context, and perhaps we can come back to that question again. Last century, it's been called a parliament because that's probably the nearest thing people can think of, but basically a runanga, wasn't it? That met annually. It would meet annually, an annual meeting of chiefs who would talk about common problems, who would deal in the first instance with, initially with representatives from the English Crown, because there was no colonial government here, it was pre-1840, then it met again in the 1860s, where it did meet with the colonial government, met annually, so it's not going to be the sort of parliament that meets, several times a year or anything like that. It's really a forum to discuss these things. Is that what you envisage?
That's how I see it at the moment, yes.
How soon do we move to that, do you think?
At this point, Tuesday was the launching, and the launching was all about reinstating Ko Huiarau again. So although we have many skilled hapu members who are working on the internal affairs side, health, education, housing, welfare, the commercial arm, Māori banking. There's an enormous amount of mahi that has to be done. So over the next few months, that's what we're going to be doing, is structuring ourselves internally, making sure that we're well and truly ready to assist hapu.
And you have resources to do this?
Yes, we do have resources, and the next question is, where are they coming from?
Well, no, not necessarily, if you don't want to tell us. I mean, the point is that I guess those are questions that people are asking, and there's that wonderful saying of ours that a bird needs feathers to fly.
Aye.
And so it's a question of, do you have huru and is it, how will it be applied?
Sure. No, I'm prepared to answer that question as much as I can. We have several interested sponsors who have heard and been sympathetic to our vision. Their whole interest, of course, is on a humanitarian role. They see that the Māori nation are a fit within a third world criteria. We live in a very affluent country beside a first world nation, and so the statistics, the New Zealand statistics, show that we're at the bottom of health, education, housing, welfare. Our people are mainly those that are in the prisons, and unemployment is mainly Māori. So those who we have discussed and shared our vision with are assisting us. Now at this point they would prefer to remain anonymous, and we would just like to respect that. At a later time perhaps that would be a time for them to come forward if they wish.
A whole lot of people out there who are not familiar with Ko Huiarau and are wondering what it's about and how they might react with it. What's your response to that?
I think one of the greatest things for me anyway has been the presentations of Ko Huiarau, and our marae Tikanga was very fortunate to have Ko Huiarau come just before the celebrations we had here in Tamaki, and there are many people I know that are registering and they want to have presentations in their areas. I feel that has to be an ongoing thing, that we're going to let our people know what Ko Huiarau is all about.
And so, in effect, you're turning your backs on places like the New Zealand Māori Council, the Congress, and institutions like that, trust boards, other runanga. How do you fit in with them, do you think?
Me tiru anō tērā ka kōrero pātai ne, me tiru hea I muri o ngau rōpūraka. Me ka ate te tiro koe ka ki te koe nā te kawana kē tēraka. Nā te kawana kē rātou I whakatū. Ko tēnei nā ngā hapu kē I whakatū, hake te kawana.
I don't think the Congress was set up by the government.
Engari ngā poari, ne? Engari ngā poari. I whakatū, nā te kawana kē. Nā me I tūai.
Okay. I can understand that. You're saying that there are institutions set up by the government which you don't have a lot of respect and time for, and so you're more prepared to set up something that comes up from Maori. You don't think that's splitting us up? Weakening our effort if we have yet another organisation?
I think it's evident that those organisations have not worked. For once, hapu are standing up and saying, we want to be accountable for ourselves. For a very long time, government has been asking hapu to do this. Trust boards and any other institution have also been asking for this. So, you know, this is really mooted from hapu. This is what they wish to do, and I think it's wonderful that today, 1997, hapu is saying we're going to be accountable for ourselves.
E te tautoko koe tēnā?
Ai, tautoko. Tautoko ana nā kōrero naka. Kei roto I ngā hapu te man, mō rātou. Mā rātou anō, kei rātou anō te rongoa, mō rātou nei mate.
Mahinarangi tokoroa. Huiatahi, thank you all very much for coming in here to be with us this morning. That's Aurere for this week. We'll be back again next week for the second to last Aurere and Marae for the year. We'll see you then, but before then...
The sun is the life force of our solar system.
Tā wāhi, ko whakaungia mai ki tātou ki roto ki te iwi Māori, kia o atu tātou ki roto I te kaupapara.